David Cay Johnston, everybody. Hi, David.
Hello, Mark.
David's what a day. I mean, and what a week for the former president. Now, I wonder if you could, point us toward magnetic north on everything going on.
Well, weeks are going to get worse going forward. Donald Trump revealed on his Truth Social that he received a target letter, he says Sunday night, from the Justice Department. More likely he actually got it on Friday. And a target letter means that the federal grand jury prosecutors are advising you that they believe they have grounds to ask for an indictment. They haven't done so yet. They give you a short period of time, in this case 4 days, to come and testify before the grand jury or present evidence that you think may show you didn't do anything wrong or certainly didn't do anything worthy of indictment. So I would expect possibly as early as Friday, but more likely Tuesday of next week. Grand juries often don't meet on Mondays. That Donald Trump will be indicted in what I expect will be a sweeping multi-defendant action about his failed attempt to overthrow the government of the United States. An attempt that we now know from material that's come from the lawyers for other witnesses and subpoenas and whatnot in the public record started well before the November 2020 election and reached its peak on January 6th when Trump told the mob to go down to the Capitol. Now, there are two charges we should watch for, Mark, because they have similar but very distinctly different meanings. Title 18 is the portion of the U.S. Code that's the criminal code. And Section 2383 says, quote, whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 10 years or both, and shall be incapable of holding public office. Now, that's critical. That's the one that would keep Donald Trump from being president, though I'm sure there will be some conservative lawyers who will argue that it violates the Constitution only for the case of the president because the conditions for being president are age of 40, citizen, natural-born citizen of the U.S., resident in the country for 14 years. There is a second possible charge. It's the very next statute in order. Title 18, Section 2384. And that's a conspiracy to impede the government, seditious conspiracy. It has a prison term of up to 20 years, but does not prevent one who has been convicted from holding office.
So that is a marked change from some of the other stuff that you've pointed out along the way. You've kind of taken pains to tell us that, you know, this guy literally could be president from prison. I mean, to state it in sort of the extreme.
Yes, no, absolutely. If he's convicted of the second charge and isn't charged with the first one, he can serve as president of the United States. By the way, there's a whole long discussion on CNN and another one on MSNBC about, well, how would you put a president in prison? And I thought both of them were some of the dumbest things I've ever seen on television. The idea that we can't come up with a way to hold Donald Trump in a prison is absurd. First of all, you can put him in a military base. Secondly, you can take a portion of a prison and essentially he's the only person who's there except for his Secret Service detail. It's just an absurd discussion to even have.
Well, yeah. Now, and I'm seeing in the chat, a lot of people are saying, hey, there's no way this guy, Donald Trump's going to prison. But let's put that aside.
I think he may go to prison. He may get, if he's assuming he's convicted here, he may get home confinement, hopefully at Trump Tower, not Mar-a-Lago. Presidents of other countries have gone to prison, other major countries. So I wouldn't say that's out of the box.
Well, this is definitely, this is untilled soil, to say the least. But David, if you, For a moment, I put the prison side thing aside and ask you about the pace at which things are proceeding in view of when the election is coming up and how you calibrate all of that. Will this stuff come to term? Will we birth some legal baby before this election or not?
Well, the Constitution has a right of speedy trial. That is a right of the government, of the people. It is not a right of the defendant. And Donald's lifelong strategy has always been delay, 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 delay. And he, in some cases, has delayed proceedings for well over a decade. Jack Smith's office has made it very clear that they want a definitive trial date. There's a hearing going on today before Judge Eileen Cannon, the Trump appointee, who you may recall in the Mar-a-Lago documents matter that led up to his arrest and indictment, said that he deserves special treatment, which I think is a pretty blatant violation of her constitutional oath. And she was slapped down by the circuit court she's under, which is very conservative. The prosecutors want a trial date of December 4th or December 11th. I don't think it'll happen then, but that means they want to go to trial January or February. This case is probably much more important in terms of Trump's future, because assuming they charge him with trying to overthrow the government, we need to get that resolved ahead of the election. Trump has claimed that holding a trial before the campaign is over, he couldn't get a fair jury. Well, then why would he get one after it's over? I mean, that makes no sense. Let's assume he loses. Let's assume he wins. What changes? That's just, absurd. In addition, Fannie Willis, the Fulton County DA, Fulton County overlays Atlanta. She's clearly moving ahead very quickly with 2 grand juries. And recall that she asked all the judges in the Fulton County Courthouse to schedule not few, but no trials or arraignments or hearings in the month of August, which suggests that she is bringing a big case. We've had members of the earlier grand jury who were allowed by Georgia law to talk about most of what took place, that they anticipated, one of them anticipated more than 24 indictments.
It's an overwhelming legal mountain that Trump is going to be forced to climb. And pardon us for perhaps being skeptical of the legal process, but it just seems as though he is, he's more effective at getting out of these jams than like a James Bond type character. I mean, he's really been able to elude, as you say, by delaying, by knowing the system, by paying off, by quietly settling. He's been able to elude any sort of real reckoning. So but David, it's in view of that I ask this question, notwithstanding all of what may face him legally. Were he to get in power again, were he somehow to win the election, I mean, there are ways it could happen, David. I mean,
it could.
And it's not so far-fetched. His second term, Bannon talks about it, and it's been widely publicized. I saw it in the New York Times. I saw it in The Economist. They kind of run down their plans for a second Trump term. And essentially they say, we weren't expecting, Bannon said this, we weren't expecting to win. We didn't really, in essence, have our act together on appointments, but it will be Trump loyalists across the board. We will get our agenda through, and no one will question the unitary power of the executive.
Right. Well, in my 2018 book, It's Even Worse Than You Think, I showed how Trump had very clearly said during the campaign, if you listen to him, and Steve Bannon very explicitly said, that we're going to destroy the federal government as you've known it. And they set out to do that. And I show how in some areas they were quite successful, particularly environmental laws and undermining those. But Donald had around him people with no experience in government. Steve Bannon, although he'd been a military officer briefly as a young man, had not ever had an experience in government. He brought in all these amateurs and posers because a lot of people didn't want to be associated with him. This time around, if Donald gets to the White House, his plans to make himself dictator that I've been warning about for more than 8 years will absolutely be front and center. The New York Times had a terrific story the other day about what they're planning to do if they get back into the White House, because they've communicated this to a lot of people. We will see Donald Trump try to position himself as dictator for life. He will prosecute his political enemies, whether there's cases there or not. He won't enforce all sorts of laws. It will be the end of American democracy as we have known it. And I don't think a lot of people just don't seem to appreciate that. They have bought Donald's claims that he alone can save us. And those claims shouldn't be ringing very well right now. We have the lowest inflation rate among the advanced nations of the world, significantly lower than, Canada, England, Germany, France, etc. We have a base unemployment rate of 3.6%, which economists have long argued that a 5% unemployment rate is pretty much full employment. We keep adding jobs. Wages have been rising faster than inflation now for 6 or 9 months. And we're starting now to fix up the infrastructure that we have let fall apart for 5 decades. And so it's kind of hard to understand why people who think critically would support Donald Trump. But that leads me to the other point, and that is half of Americans read at the level of a 6th grader and a fifth read at the level of 3rd graders. And I don't care if you're the smartest kid in your class in 6th grade, you don't have the facility to think at the level needed to tell that when Donald Trump is conning you. And that's what he is. He's the world's most successful con artist.
Well, his messaging is designed or coincidentally effective on the level at which you're talking about, which is to people who are not really doing a lot of deep digging. They're just looking for a chant, a bumper sticker, slogan, whatever. And I think that that's what we've seen, right? Lock her up, build the wall. Mexico's going to pay for it. Whatever the stop the steal. I mean, I hate to say it. These are, outrageous things that he said. I mean, the Mexico's going to pay for it was so outrageous. And the wall itself seemed outrageous to me. I think as I may have mentioned to you before, I know I've mentioned on this show that he was going to get the appropriations for. I just didn't think, I thought, well, that's a great campaign thing to say, but you're not going to get that money. Congress is not going to approve the money to build some ridiculous wall.
He did do a bit of work on some parts of the wall, really a fence. And how did he do that? Well, military housing that has mold and water heaters that don't work and things like that. He took it from that. He took it from military hospitals for military families. He took it from things that were important to maintaining our national security, because if you don't have soldiers who feel that their families are safe at home, they're not going to be effective and they're going to get out as soon as their contract is up. And by the way, the DC report was the first to say that the We Build the Wall charity was a scam. We were way ahead of everybody else, months ahead of everybody else. And those people have now been convicted. Steve Bannon got away, even though he stole $1 million, because Trump pardoned him. By the way, that's the other thing Trump is promising, is to pardon all of his Confederates, all the people who are now in prison for trying to overthrow the government.
Well, that seems like it would be maybe top of the agenda.
Yes. Well, just imagine if the South had won the Civil War, what would have happened? I mean, that's right where we are. Jefferson Davis would have pardoned all of the traitors for whom we've surprisingly named all sorts of military bases and roads and buildings. And they would be in charge. And Trump could get back in. I mean, I thought it was a very good chance he would get back in. He would get in 2016. Warned about that in 2015, and he did. And I was mocked all over the place for that's ridiculous, until he had the Republican nomination locked up. And we need to have these trials before the election. It's absolutely crucial that we do so. And by the way, I know that some people I saw on Twitter and Threads today were saying, well, Trump just won't show up for the trial. That's not an option. A civil trial you don't have to show up for, but a criminal trial you are required to be there for every second. That's the standard set by the courts, every second. And if you don't show up, they arrest you, and the bailiffs bring you in and seat you at the table.
Yeah, so you don't have the option. It's not like that civil suit, as you say. This is troubling. Let me just, because these words are mentioned here. James says, I hate to say it, but I prefer a civil war to a permanently entrenched dictatorship. I mean, a civil war is a bloody, awful, horrifying prospect. It devoid of, I mean, David, please, civil war to me, because it's thrown around a lot. You know what I mean? Like, oh, we're on the verge of civil. Yeah, go ahead.
Right after January 6th, I wrote that we are in a low-grade civil war, the outcome of which is certain, which is that the losers around Trump are going to lose. But the 1860 to 65 Civil War, 1861 to 65 Civil War, every 40th American died. Think about that for a minute. 2.5% of the population, every 40th American died. And people didn't have assault rifles back then. If we actually get into a fighting civil war, the death toll will be vastly higher, and America will completely lose its leadership place in the world. I mean, because my wife, who was the CEO of a $600 million endowment, retired, we have been doing a lot of traveling, and because we never could before. We both worked 60-hour weeks. And I got to tell you, when I was talking to people in Iceland and Northern Ireland, Amsterdam last month, their views of the U.S. under Trump and their how could you elect someone who's so obviously crazy, who's so obviously stupid, who obviously is unqualified? They're just astounded by this. I remember one Dutch guy said to me that if a Dutch prime minister said, well, maybe we'll inject ourselves with bleach, they would have been ridiculed out of office the next day. There would have been no confidence vote. I pointed out we don't have a parliament. We have a Congress. It's a different system. But you don't want to have a civil war by any means whatsoever. And you don't want a tyrant who doesn't understand the Constitution, doesn't know the law, is deeply mentally ill. You don't want someone like that in the White House. And, we've had mentally ill people lead governments and rebellions all throughout history. This is not a surprising thing. It's just never happened in the United States until Donald Trump.
I just think about how far in our last minute or two, David, how far the presidency has fallen from the beginnings of this country. I was talking to Tom Hartman yesterday, and he's written a new book on the democracy and sort of the birth of our democracy, and how democracy didn't, of course, originate with America at all, and how also it predated the Romans and the Greeks. I mean, it's been around in native peoples for a while. You could argue that it's sort of the natural state of things, that collectives of people evolve the society to these democracies. But anyway, we started talking about early presidents, and these guys, you can say what you want, and it definitely was a troubled time in some ways, but they were hanging on to ideals to craft a better nation. They really did try in those original documents to craft a system that was better for the nation. It was a selfless act on many levels. It feels as though we've fallen a long way from that.
Well, you've hit upon the key thing about Donald Trump. I mean, even John Adams, who was paranoid and wanted to lock up his opponents and got the Sedition Act passed, he had a sense of reverence for the ideals of our Constitution. Donald Trump doesn't have any of that. He has no capacity for empathy. He has no education. And remember, he claims to be the world's greatest expert on 22 subjects. I don't have to knock down anything except nobody is the world's greatest expert on more than one subject. And even the people who are top experts would say, well, I don't know that much. But
He may be the world's top on grifting, though. He's right up there. He's a medalist. He's on the medal stand somewhere.
Yeah. Donald is the most successful con artist in world history. I'll absolutely give him credit for that. We currently have in the White House a president who clearly knows what he's doing. He's the first president since Lyndon Johnson, with the exception of Jerry Ford, who didn't have any authority to do anything during his 2.5 years as president because he wasn't elected. He was just a placeholder. If he gotten elected, things would have been different. So for the first time since Lyndon Johnson, we have a president who knows how Capitol Hill works. He understands geopolitics because for so many years he was head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And remember, he's the one who went and literally confronted the genocidal maniacs in the war in Bosnia. At great personal risk. And he's rebuilt our NATO alliance. He's expanded NATO. He's managed to prosecute the war in Ukraine without getting it blown up into something bigger and worse. I think he should be more aggressive than he's been. And he's produced an economy, 13.2 million jobs in 2.5 years. Even if you just count the first 3 years of Trump, he produced fewer jobs per month on average than Barack Obama did after the economy turned around in the spring of 2010. Just as you shouldn't blame George W. Bush for the economy he inherited, same with Barack Obama, anybody else. It takes about a year to get your presidency in place. But this tremendous economic performance greatly restored our position on the world stage. And this madman, this nutcase, who has all of these followers who are filled with grievances and anger, and the racism is now right up front. There's the racism, the anti-LGBTQ bigotry, the fear of the other is right up front, Mark. I think the American people are going to prove to be smarter than Donald Trump, but I don't discount the prospect that they won't. It's really important to make sure that the speedy trial requirement in the Constitution is upheld and that Donald Trump is tried before the election on the January 6th case, and I would hope on the Mar-a-Lago documents case, and he should be treated just like anybody else. And if somebody listening says, well, why does he have all these different charges they're piling on? It's because he committed lots of different crimes. That's like saying, well, yes, why are you prosecuting me for bank robbery across 5 states? Just because I drove across 5 states.
You can find him, his writings. You can find him on all the different, everything from MS to CNN and on at dcreport.org. He is the co-founder and here so generously on Tuesdays. David, it's a great pleasure. Thank you. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.